Hey guys, before we dive into this first episode, I did just want to take a moment to share with you the vision that we had for Tides of Lore. While Tim and I have been playing World of Warcraft together for years, and there are tons of fantastic sources out there for us to learn the game's rich history, it can often feel overwhelming, especially if you're a new player. With nearly 3 decades of lore, finding a clear starting point can seem almost impossible. So that's why we created Tides of Lore. Our goal is to offer a grounded and approachable way to explore the vast universe of Warcraft, trimming away the more confusing or maybe intimidating aspects of the lore while providing reliable information for both new and veteran players. We want to inspire curiosity and give you the tools to dig deeper into this universe. And while we're still finding our footing, and I have the occasional slip up like calling Kilrog One Eye instead of Deadeye, honestly my nerves got the better of me there in this episode, I'm confident that this project will only grow stronger as we continue. So thank you for granting us your patience and joining us on this journey. Now sit back and enjoy the very first episode of Tides of Lore. Hello everybody and welcome to the first episode of Tides of Lore. My name is Robert Silva and I will be one half of your host team today. Joined by me today is my co-host Tim as always.
Hey, what up? Tim, Troy TV, whatever you want to call me.
So we wanted to just come here today and start up this podcast, or at least we had this idea to start this podcast, and go into the history and the lore, obviously, of Warcraft, but to kind of decipher how that both affected the actual characters in the game as well as the players like me and Tim, while not delivering it in as such a textbook format as some of the longer novel style videos that you'll find on YouTube and stuff like that.
I like it. It's going to be, candid, in the moment. I'm a big guy who loves playing the game. Rob's a big guy who loves knowing about the game, or diving into the lore, I should say.
So yeah, I guess to kind of give it a simple explanation, I was tired of running dungeons with Tim and stuff like that and constantly having to explain every little thing while playing the game. So hopefully this will help to kind of clarify things, so while we're in game later down the line, he'll have all the information he needs, and you guys will too. And with that, today we will be starting with the Orcs, the Ogres, and ancient Draenor.
The Orcs, you mean the best race in WoW?
Well, we'll see, Tim. We'll see what they get up to. They do have quite an interesting history. So the reason I did want to start here is because I feel like a lot of people, like when it comes to a universe like World of Warcraft, and I've recently been getting into stuff like 40k, when it has such a long history, and WoW's literally pushing like 30, 40 years of lore history at this point, it can be so difficult to find an actual good starting point. And even me, who is like super into the lore, was looking for a certain place that I could jump off, and I was like, oh well, we'll just start from like literally the beginning of the WoW timeline and we'll go from there. But I do kind of feel like that's like it's kind of like this cosmic scale battle that we don't even really interact with or talk about at all for a lot of the story up until much of recent WoW history. So with that, I instead decided we should start where a lot of other players started, and that is with the Orcs and with the Alliance. This episode is going to be focusing on the Orcs and their tale through Draenor, and the next episode will be focusing on the beginning of the humans and the Alliance on Azeroth. Just to get straight into it, Draenor, not the typical planet that you would expect from the people who played World of Warcraft at least, or the Warcraft games, which it is Azeroth for those who are just uninformed. Draenor is a completely different planet. The Orcs are technically aliens. They arrive, well, I guess we'll get to that, how they arrive, but nonetheless, they are not from the planet that the game typically has them there with. So to get into how they even came to being, Draenor was this kind of ancient, really primal world that had these constantly warring factions of a group called the Breakers and a group called the Primals, and we'll try and save a bit of their lore for later because they're, again, kind of not too relevant to the story, at least not compared to the Orcs. But from there we can kind of give an idea of how the Orcs came to be, because these Breakers, it's hard to describe, but they're these Goliath-like beings, walking mountains, really. that would face off against this ever encroaching, never ending growth of plant life. And it was just this constant, never ending battle between the two of them. So much so that as they like smashed into each other, these mountain-like beings began to break down into other creatures. And these other creatures would become, I guess to break it down, this main creature was Gron. He was the big mountain, the biggest mountain of all the mountains. And from him, all these little tiny mountains began to form. And from there, even tinier groups began to form. And these would be the Gron, the Ogron, the Ogres, and the Orcs. So these are going to be kind of our main 4 groups on Draenor, with the exception of also the Arakoa, who do not come from the same line.
You're telling me orcs derived of mountains?
Orcs came from mountains.
What?
Supercharged space mountains.
That's why they're so fucking strong, dude.
Yeah, kinda. To be honest with you, this was kind of my first time reading through the Chronicle, and if you haven't read through Chronicles, it's literally this 4 sets of lore books that are just detailing the entire history of lore, and it's written by, I believe, Chris Metzen and a handful of other really, the super passionate people for creating the game. And it really just goes into detail about how all of these tiny, minuscule lore details came into being. And I was shocked to find just how powerful things like, the stupid, dumb ogres that you encounter in the game who can barely, function in speech actually end up being. So that is one part of our episode, and we'll get right into that.
Real quick. So, as orcs got smaller, they got smarter, though, huh?
So just in general, the descendants of Grond, the bigger they were, typically, obviously, they were much more powerful and much stronger, but they also tend to be much more like isolated. They tended to be a lot more stupid. The smaller groups, because they basically had to learn to collaborate, they had to learn to be intelligent, they had to learn to survive in other ways besides just hitting it as hard as possible. Uncommon for an orc, I know.
They just do it in numbers.
It's a collective effort. We're all in this together, truly.
But it's kind of like humans, you think of gorillas, dude, they're really strong, but, they're not intelligent. And then we got smaller and smaller, and, more intelligent, though.
Exactly. Just like that, except on literally a mountain scale, because the largest of these factions were the Gron. Of these descendants were the Gron. And they were, like I said, they weren't quite as big as Grond, who was their, big ancestor, but they were still towering. For anyone who has ever played WoW, this is what Gruul is. This is what the giant one-eyed creatures that walk around in the Warlords expansion are. They're massive, massive creatures. And they're so big that nowhere on Draenor can actually sustain more than one for any amount of time. So they would constantly be battling with each other, and the Gron themselves would also constantly be trying to tear out the Ogron and the Ogres. And at this time, the Orcs were similar, but they were kind of just enslaved by the Ogron. Same with the Ogres, to be honest. Most species kind of had ended up getting enslaved by them. But the Gron were like these massive, mindless creatures that walked around, but the Ogron were at least intelligent enough. They were still really dumb, but they were at least intelligent enough to know that working together was good. When they worked together, they found out, wow, nobody is stronger than us when we are all together. So the Ogron went and found the Ogres and the Orcs, and they were like, you guys don't have a choice. You work for us now.
Slavery.
Yeah, and this happened for, I believe, 200 years, something like that. All of these events take place about 1,200 years before the very first Warcraft game, and I believe all that's going to take place like a decade or so before WoW would even kick off. But I don't entirely remember the details on that, so I'll hold my tongue for next episode on that detail.
Even in WoW, you can't escape slavery, huh?
Well, as the Orcs arrive on Azeroth, we'll find some interesting things in there too. But yeah, truly, despite WoW having almost a cartoonish and fun style to it, it actually does have a lot of really dark content, especially when you get into like the origin of the Orcs. Like if you were to listen to the Rise of the Horde book, which by the way, listen to the Rise of the Horde book because it is truly like an excellent spot to start off to understand lore about World of Warcraft, but it's also just truly a great fantasy story. I think all of Christie Gul'dan's books are super, super well done, but the fact that that was written in 2007, just before the Burning Crusade expansion came out, and it feels like it is so alive and every second of it is believable it's truly a great book. And to see how far they've expanded upon it, it's also really interesting. But to swing back over to the descendants of Gron, this whole kind of conflict is constantly waging back and forth between these four factions. Typically, these larger dominate the smaller, and that's just kind of how it went. Power was absolute on Draenor. And that would be until the Arakoa, who are these, like, half bird-like humans. I mean, they're not humans, but they're human-like. They walk on two legs, they have wings, but they kind of also have hands. And they were magic users. None of the descendants of Gron were able to use magic, but these Arakoa, who descended from his like empire from long, long before, they were able to use magic from what they had learned historically, and they wanted some of these artifacts that were inside of these ogre camps, or in these Ogron camps rather, because the Ogron were the ones that were basically enslaving all the other races, with the exception of the Orcs, some of the Orcs who were hidden in caves. So they would go to these Ogron and they would be like, hey guys, we really want to get your artifacts out of there. We know you guys really don't care for those, so if you want to just pass them on over, that'd be great. Ogron not like that.
Whose artifacts were
Ogron?
these? Like,
so these were literally, if you've played the Warlords of Draenor expansions, these were literally Apexis crystals.
and they were just sitting on top of them? They're just...
Well, they were... Yeah, they were literally just sitting on top of them, because this had all been the Arakoa's, like, empire before, and it kind of collapsed. And again, I'm trying to save some of those other races, because we do have a lot to get through just to even get to the Orcs for another time, but I did want to kind of detail how the Orcs would even come to being, because their start is a brutal one, and to become who they were, or who they even are, they had to be brutalistic. So yeah, these Arakoa, they want these artifacts. The Ogron, they're basically too dumb to barter, and they're too dumb to be bribed. They just want to fight, and those are their things, so don't touch them. So the Arakoa flying up above, they're like, all right, we got to find out another way to crack these bases. And they decide, well, what if we go over to these slaves, these ogres, and we tell them, like, and we gift them with power, teach them the ability to use magic, and then from there, they'll overthrow their masters, because the only thing that's stopping them is that they're afraid of them. So the Arakoa are like, all right, great plan. They go down to these ogres, and these ogres take to learning magic like water. They shock the Arakoa with how they use it, because the Arakoa don't know this, but the descendants of Grond are all gifted with magical abilities, because they were... Grond himself was literally gifted by one of these deities that we'll get into in another time. So they are just naturally attuned to being good at magic. So they begin to teach the Arakoa all new spells. The Arakoa are shocked because they haven't seen anyone just like, okay, I'm just going to do a new spell. And the ogre, despite being super dumb, basically, are able to do this.
Huh. They just bring it out of themselves? They're just farting out spells, new ones too? That's crazy.
So specifically, they're really good at like shaping earth, and it's almost like shamanistic powers at this point still, but they basically can just like demand that like, well, a spike of earth is going to come flying at you, and it does, or the ground beneath you is just going to collapse, and it does. But as we'll get into, this very much isn't shamanistic, because this is like the arcane magics and shamanism, they don't really blend. The elements tend to see when the arcane is used on the elements as like rending the flesh of the earth. And we'll talk about that as we come to a later story. But when it comes to the ogres, it cannot be understated how important basically the ogre Gog would be. Gog was like one of these first master magi under these Arakoa trainers. And when he was all ready to go, they were like, all right, go overthrow your Ogron masters. And he was just like, bet. And he stomps out of his slave pits or whatever he's at, and he goes right past the Ogron. And they don't really understand why. And it would be because this ogre would become known as the Gron Slayer. He had always, basically all the ogres, see the Ogron as super powerful oppressors, but the Gron, the Gruuls, the super tall creatures of the world that, tower, and often the ogres, like elderly and they're weak, would be sacrificed to just to be left alone. Gog would down one on his own. And it would shock everybody, including the Arakoa.
What's the height difference we're talking? An ogre's probably like 8 foot.
I would say an ogre is probably 8 feet tall, and I would say that Gron, I'm not going to say they're as big as Gruul, because Gruul is literally like the Gron. He survives all the way to the Burning Crusade. But they're all at least probably like 30, 40 feet tall, technically. It's crazy.
Did this guy have a weapon?
Had magic.
Magic.
And that's what would come to be understood, is that everyone would realize that, oh shit, magic is infinitely more powerful than any amount of dumb guys you can throw at me. So Gog would down one of these guys. And then at first they're like, okay, that was crazy, but maybe he was lucky. But then he would kill another Gron. And then another, and another, and another. And then there would be 5 dead Gron, and all of these whispers would be going across all of these ogre slave camps, and they would hear about this. So by the time that he arrives back at his camp, everyone's like, oh, there's no need to convince us to revolt. We're with you, bro.
Yeah.
And they do. And all of the now magically trained ogres overthrow the Ogron. It kind of begins the absolute downfall of the Ogron, because from here on out, you really do not see any of them. And after the Orcs take over, they're basically hunted to extinction, with the exception of, I think, Frostfire Ridge.
I do remember them walking around. Frostfire Ridge, but I didn't know why.
So the Ogres take over. They've got all the stuff now, and the Arakoa come flying back in, and they're like, hey, so we helped you overthrow those guys. Let me get those crystals. And the ogres, now understanding what magic is and how like these artifacts are like basically enchanted with magic, they're like, no. And the Arakoa are like, what the fuck? So the Arakoa are like, well, fine then. And they fly off, and they're like, we'll just take it by force. We'll just do it that way. So they come back later in the night, and they're like, we're just going to nuke them. And they try to attack what is this new capital ogre city called Goria. And they come and they just raid this place at night, and they try and use the magics and use their deep wisdom to overthrow these ogres. But basically, because they had freed so many of these ogre slaves, and they had so many reinforcements, and they were now all able to do magic, they wiped the floor with the Arakoa, who had to just retreat all the way back to the Spires of Iraq, where the ogres couldn't even get to.
Feels bad, man.
Then it kind of leads to this era called the Gorian Empire, and this is going to go on for hundreds of years on Draenor, where the ogres and their magics rule over the planet for the most part. The Orcs, now since the Ogron have basically had their unity shattered, and the Gron have nearly been hunted to extinction already, the Orcs, who used to live in caves and used to be slaves to the Ogron as well, they're like, we're getting out of here. And them being the smallest of the groups, they were like, we will stick all together, we'll form these tribes together, and we'll look out for one another. They don't necessarily look out for one another's tribes, but sometimes they do, and we'll get into that. Orcs would come out of these caves and come to the surface. They would quickly encounter overcrowding and quickly overpopulation booms, and this is what would kind of begin to cause them to move all across Draenor, as opposed to being in, I believe they were mainly in these caves underneath Nagrand before, And after that, they just begin to migrate across the entire planet, from the snowy caps to the jungles to the long plains. And they all kind of develop these different identities as they go along. Because like I said, this kind of, it's not necessarily a peace, but, you know, the orcs exist and they're in kind of a conflict with the ogres, but the ogres don't really see them as actual competition. You know, if they do something too upsetting, then they'll go fuck them up, but otherwise they'll just leave them be. And the only real constant conflict you find are the High Mall ogres and the War Song. And to kind of break down some of these clans for you, we'll start with the War Song. The War Song were kind of these like nomad clans, and they constantly rode across Nagran looking for resources, battles, stuff like that. And they would, like I said, frequently come into conflict with these ogres. And despite this, again, it never really broke out into anything because the ogres were just like, we'll, cast a few spells, cause an earthquake, and they'll go running. Some of the other clans would head a bit further north, like the Blackrock clan. They would find themselves remaining in certain caves. It was actually Gorgron that they came from originally. And these would be the Blackrock clan. And they would they would kind of stay in these caves, and they would begin to like really learn how to mine and really learn how to craft metals to be like the best weapons that they could forge on the planet.
Were they the ones with dragons?
No, so there's the Dragonmaw clan, but also interestingly, the Dragonmaw clan, it's hard to just... Truthfully, they are kind of a retcon, because they named them that, obviously intending for them to ride dragons.
Right.
But then when the lore came out, there aren't dragons in Draenor.
Oh,
there are only dragons on Azeroth. Yeah.
And,
but I guess the excuse they...
I thought Malagos did fly through the portal at one point and laid eggs on... I guess it would be Outland, not...
That is Deathwing. But yes, and that is actually...
Deathwing.
That is where you come into a lot of the Gruul storyline. But again, we're going to have to save that. I think probably for the aspect video. Just again, we are trying to pump through these orcs.
Yep. Sorry.
No, it's all good. I want you to ask anything that you're interested in.
I just like orcs riding dragons. That's cool.
Yeah, and I guess what the excuse that I guess not excuse, but the reasoning that they give in the lore is that the Dragon Maw were like these master beast tamers. And when they came through the dark portal and they encountered these dragons, they were, kind of tasked with being the ones to break them and to be the ones to bend them to their will. And that's when they kind of truly gain the identity of being, an actual dragon-riding Dragon Maw clan.
So it was just coincidence they were named.
We'll say that, yeah. It was probably an oversight in development or just over the years, but truthfully, it's something that doesn't
I'm glad
really
it worked
matter.
out for them.
Yeah. I'm really happy for them, truly.
Hey, just envision it, and it happens.
Speaking of envisioning it, we're going to go to another clan. And this clan is actually one that survives deep within the eastern Tanan jungle. They're known as the Bleeding Hollow clan. And they kind of split into two groups. One of them became really like superstitious and cannibalistic. I guess I should mention they're both really superstitious. Even the ones that didn't become cannibalistic, like
it was so commonplace. Bad they cut their hand off or some shit.
They would gouge their eyes out.
Oh shit!
To gain prophetic visions. I believe Kilrog One Eye or whatever his name. I think that is a Bleeding Hollow that has one eye in the Horde. And that is why he only has one eye, is because his clan gouges out their eyes in the hopes of gaining visions. I do remember that Horde character specifically was given a vision of their death. And with that, basically they go into combat nonstop afraid because they're like, oh, this isn't that time.
Kilrog One Eye, that warlocks have an ability, Kilrog's Eye, that they use. And it's literally like, it's kind of like Eyes of the Beast for the Hunter. You summon this eye, and you can run around and see what like around the corner and shit.
Dude,
so that's where it comes from.
Playing BFA, and they used to camp caves with it before rushing in with their entire squad.
Yeah.
Two of the other clans, and it's pretty much impossible to talk about the Orcs without at least going over them because, well, they kind of lead to the start of shamanism, and the other ones are kind of the good guys, if you can even look at it like that, because at the end of this, there aren't really any. You started off with the Shadow Moon Clan. These were a group of mystics. They were stargazers. They were in this like really tranquil valley of Draenor that was almost in like this, not eternal night, but it was like this almost eternal twilight. It was really a beautiful place, and it's why they would begin to form their entire ideology around mysticism and around astrology and around gaining prophecy through I guess a greater understanding of the universe. And then there's the Frostwolf. The Frostwolf are obviously kind of the line that lead to a lot of our main characters in the Warcraft franchise. This is, where we get Durotan. This is where we get Draka. This is where we get, obviously, Thrall, who would go on to be the Orc. But they have an interesting history, and that's for sure.
The noble. Probably the most noble clan, right?
True, kind of.
Honorary,
it's hard because they are very honorary, and they wanted to. Their whole thing was that it wasn't good to become overcome with rage, because when you're overcome with rage, you make bad decisions. And if you do want to see this, there's the Durotan short on YouTube, and it kind of goes into this primal rage where he's trying to protect his mom as she's dying in the snow patch. And they've been left behind by their tribe's caravan, and he's trying to keep her alive through this winter. And they're constantly under attack by wolves, and he has his mother's like big like dire wolf basically that is helping him to protect her. And he's just doing this for so long that eventually he gets so drained of fighting these things that he just snaps and he goes berserk and he just kills everything in sight. And when he finally snaps out of it, his mom is like, "What have you done?" And, well, not what have you done, but like, what is happening? And she, wakes up from like this coma basically, but he has murdered even her wolf in this blind rage. So he really kind of promotes this idea of you need to maintain a level head to make sure you're making the best decision.
Was that a redskin orc that was doing that?
At this point, all of the orcs still had brown skin.
Yeah, so they weren't corrupted. So it wasn't the rage of the shit that they drank.
No,
he was just angry.
Orcs just have this innate kind of bloodlust, to be honest. It's literally their racial ability, right? Yeah. And this is kind of why they would be taken advantage of later down the line, because they were so open to this kind of mindset. And just to go back to that story real quick, this is actually why you see Durotan wearing that white hood all the time. That is that wolf that he killed in a blind rage. He wears that helm to honor that wolf till the day he dies. And that is kind of where the Frostwolf built their identity too. They were this clan of hunters that learned to be one with nature. They learned to hunt with the wolves themselves to gain kills and stuff like that, and eventually tame these beasts. And that's how they gained their name of the Frostwolf.
Is there a first clan of shamans?
That's actually what we're getting into right
now.
Wow. Yes, sir. So back in Shadow Moon Valley, you would find the Shadow Moon clan, and they would find themselves, like I said, there were these mystics kind of. And they would find themselves like unnaturally drawn to Nagrand. And Nagrand, to people who don't play WoW, is just kind of the west side of the planet. Draenor kind of appears to be a single like Pangea-like continent. So it's on the far west. So these guys are like, well, can't argue with the deities. Got to go do that. And they begin to head out on these pilgrimage over years and years. And eventually they find these grand stones. Or I guess they weren't stones yet, but this was like this almost temple. It was like a mountain. And it was actually the skull and the final like death place of the actual Gron himself, like that grand mountain like deity that was empowered by a god I mentioned earlier. That was literally his dead body. The primordial spirits of the planet would be calling them there. This would be the spirits of fire, air, earth, water. And when these mystics would go there, they would it would become a really like religious experience basically for them. It was considered like a truly high honor to be somebody who would be able to see these spirits or be able to interact with these spirits. And eventually they would kind of learn to, through respect and collaboration with these spirits, they would be able to like wield their powers. And this location, this skull, or I guess this mountain at this time, would be known as the Throne of Elements. And it still exists in game, though it is significantly smaller. And we'll get to that. Like I mentioned earlier, when the ogres used magic, they would rip at the ground and they would just wreck everything. And the earth spirits, they really didn't like that. Basically, if the Shadow Moon called upon earth spirits and the earth needed to do something, it wouldn't necessarily be damaging. It wouldn't be like, crush these dudes under a earthquake. It would be like, build this a small hill so that we can have, so that we can build an aqueduct or some crazy shit like that, right? So it's more how they can aid each other as opposed to listen to me and follow my orders. Once the ogres begin to see these Shadow Moon interacting with the spirits, and as these generations would go by, these practices would become known as shamanism, and it would give birth to the first shamans. So they were no longer just these mystics who saw things prophetically, but they were literally enhanced with these powers. And all the clans across Draenor would see this and kind of see this the same way. So they would begin sending their young aspirants to the Throne of Elements when they became of age, because they, wanted shaman too. And the shaman obviously were basically called to these locations too.
So it's almost like a religion.
It really kind of was. And to the orcs, this is their religion, basically. They don't really, it's not, all of the creatures of Azeroth or World of Warcraft don't really believe in religion the same way we do, because, well, a lot of them have, like, literally seen gods with their two eyes.
Well, they worship the light, kind of.
Yeah, and, oof, ain't that a tale? But that is actually a good point, because there are these cosmic beings that are so large in scale that it's incomprehensible. And that is kind of the problem. These shamans, a lot of them would go to the Throne of Elements and they would try and commune with the spirits, but not all of them would reach the right spirits. And some of them would actually, through kind of piercing through this ethereal veil, go way too far.
Oh no.
And they would actually gaze into the void. And,
really?
This is long before we actually get any detail on what the void is. I believe it's not till like 2017 that we will get any information truly. But all we know is that no amount of time looking upon the void would prevent you from going insane. You looked upon the void, you were going fucking crazy. And these shaman, like, they would essentially be left kind of brain dead. And they would be taken to these caves in the Grand, and they would be left there, and they would have their faces tattooed with skulls by their clansmen to indicate that they were dead to them.
That's pretty metal.
Yeah. It's pretty, I think it's kind of one of the first time I was like, wow, that's kind of intense. But I'm guessing it must have been that because I don't think we ever really see what these guys are like. We do know what they eventually go on to be, but I don't think we know what they're like at this time. I have to imagine that they were just so crazy that they could not stay around their tribe at all. Because we're talking about a group of people that, like, beat the fuck out of each other for fun.
Yeah.
A lot of these shamans would become, like, basically second in command in all of their tribes. The shaman's word was considered gospel. It was literally only second to the war chief, or the tribe's chieftain themselves. And for hundreds of years, they would kind of cultivate this relationship with these elements to enrich their lives, to run away drought when it was here, or to push away a flood when it came too close, to send gusts of wind, to send Arakoa raiders flying back. It typically didn't take the form of violence, like a lightning bolt.
Yeah, I was going to say lightning.
Like nothing like that yet. Until the ogres decided to try and take the Throne of Elements. And they did. The ogres finally being like, all right, you've piqued my interest. We're going to take your throne now. They would cross the Grand and they would take the Throne of Elements. and they would just begin to rip and tear nonstop at this magical energy because they were trying to decipher it. Like, remember, these guys are arcane users. They are basically like trying to decipher how it works. And the elements are like, well, this hurts, and also this mountain isn't a mountain. It's basically a supercharged being empowered by a god. And the ogres would kind of learn that quickly, because when they carelessly would rip at it with their arcane magic and try and just decipher it through brute strength, it kind of ignited what was essentially an energy cache of like elemental energy that was left over by the creature being empowered by the gods. And when it goes off, it literally just kills every single ogre inside the area. Wow. Every single one. And the entire temple is gone, which is why you get kind of the throne of elements that you have now. The like 7 or 8 pillars of stone and no mountain. And that is all that remains. And as this happens, the elements are absolutely just sent spiraling. They don't really know what to do anymore. Like, all these storms are raging across the planet of Draenor, and they're like, we need to solve this. And the ogres just continue to come back to the throne of elements and rip and tear because they're, careless and stupid. So they call to the shaman of the orcs. And the orcs go to their, twice-a-year festival called Kosh-Arg.
Terrible
And it's basically where all the clans meet up. It's where all the clans of Draenor meet up, and they hunt, and they have, this party and the celebration, and they kind of trade information. And this time when they go, an elder shaman of the Shadow Moon named Nelgrim, he pleads for them. He says, we have to go and reclaim the Throne of Elements. We have to stop the ogres, because if we don't, they're literally going to destroy the entire planet. And for the first time, the orcs all look at each other and go, well, I guess for the first time since leaving the caves of Gorgron, they all look at each other and they go, okay, yeah, we have got to stop this together. And they unite in essentially what is the very first orc horde.
Who's the leader? Who's the leader at this time?
See, and that's the thing. It's not really, they don't really have leaders the same way. They just kind of follow their shamans. And there are certain shamans that are very important, like I said, Nelgrim and stuff like that, but there isn't a war chief at this time. And that wouldn't happen until the later hordes either. Kind of implanted for a specific reason too. As they rushed back to the Throne of Elements, the ogres would be kind of just shocked, because they'd never really expected the orcs to try and take them on one-on-one like that. Like, yeah, they got into scuffles with the war song, but those guys were like the Hellscream, always looking for a fight. They're always the first in there, and they're always looking to beef. So of course they wanted to fight, but these guys, no, this is outlandish. What a crazy thing to do. And that's exactly what the ogre leader Moloch thinks. He is flabbergasted. He's like, all right, fine. You want to be like that? So he sends the entire Gorian Empire. He sends all of the ogres across all of Draenor to hit every single orc encampment they can find and kill everybody.
Genocide.
This is kind of what truly begins orcs were always warriors, but it also kind of is what really begins to have orc mindset be that, men, women, and children all need to know how to fight. Mm-hmm. This would go on for a good while, but the orcs would quickly begin to dismantle all these little networks that were keeping the empire together. So they would hit the trading posts, and they would hit the small garrisons that kept all of the interlinking chains together. So all the cities began to have struggles with things like food and getting specific epexis crystals or reinforcements or whatever they might have needed. And that's how the orcs really began to outmaneuver the Gorians in this time frame. In literally 2 years of this kind of almost hit and run tactic, the entire ogre empire collapses. It is quite literally down to 3 cities of High Mall, I believe one other city, and the capital of Goria. And the orcs are knocking on the doorstep of Goria. And it would last for months. They would leave the city surrounded because they had already cut off all of its supply lines with the exception of the ocean. And they would just say, all right, we're going to starve them out. That'll be the solution. And the ogres were like, well, we'll just wait it out because we have this ocean. and we'll just get all of our food from there. And like I said, yeah, it goes on for months. No one really giving any way. The ogres would look for a way to break the siege, and they would actually decipher one of the Apexis crystals and discover a plague that affect the Arakoa back in the day called, I think it was like the Curse of Sethic.
Yeah.
And they would modify this to affect the orcs, basically. And this is what creates the red pox.
And what is red pox?
So red pox is... It's really just a bioweapon. It is literally a disease that spreads from orc to orc, super contagious, lasts forever, and kills basically everyone.
Wow.
Yeah, so the orcs have this running rampant through their camps now. And they're like, well, shit, our fighting forces are getting really thin, and soon we're not going to be able to keep them surrounded in the city. So Nelgrim goes to everybody, and he says, all right, we need to do something drastic. We don't have a choice anymore. We're going to lose this. And if the ogres get out, they're just going to continue to fuck with the elements, and we'll be right back in square one. So they call upon the elements, and they say, I want you to destroy Goria. I want you to scorch the entire earth. And the elements are initially kind of shocked, quickly begin to realize, like, actually, yes. Like, if the ogres go unchecked, this will be unstoppable. And this is, like, the first time the elements are used to cause real damage. And it is something that would literally frighten the ogres and even the orcs. Because gathering outside of Goria, Nelgrim and his shaman would begin to unleash the wrath of the elements. And be hours that the ground would just rattle and rip and tear and shatter until every wall collapsed, every building was fallen in, and dark clouds would go over the sky, just raining down lightning bolts nonstop as it set everything on fire. Their entire harbor would go up in flames. Moloch and his entire city would just be completely swallowed whole by the earth. And by the end, it would literally be nothing left of Goria but ash and dust.
Wow.
And like I said, both sides having suffered tremendous losses, they weren't really interested in continuing to fight each other. But with the Gorian Empire broken and the orcs having to deal with the red pox now, it kind of became a time of stagnation. Not necessarily peace, but just they weren't constantly hunting each other or fighting each other. As if, I don't think they really had the numbers to anyway. But from there on out, the orcs would claim more and more of the ogre land, and they would kind of become the dominant force on Draenor. The ogres, even with their magics and whatnot, couldn't really match up to the shamans or the intelligence of the collective orcs. So despite the kind of original orcish horde separating once again back into their tribes after this, they still controlled basically the entirety of Draenor at this point. And that would be until a mountain would fall from the sky and crash land in a purple streak of flame, which would indicate the arrival of the Draenei.
More aliens.
And the thing is that it's hard for, like, when I call the orcs aliens, they magically arrive on another planet. The Draenei are literally aliens. They fly in a magical spaceship across the cosmos from planet to planet, and they're like these eternal super intelligent elves, basically. I guess not intelligent, but super wise, because they're very faithful to this entity, I guess it would just be known as the light, which is the antithesis of the void, the exact counter to it. And typically it would guide them to heal and to prosper. But again, when it comes to the orcs, we have to just kind of touch and go on the Draenei. It's impossible to not talk about the Draenei when it comes to talking about the orcs, but they have such a long history that goes back even before the orcs themselves that it can't just be... I can't go into full detail right now, but to give you a kind of TLDR of it, the Draenei are refugee aliens on the run from a corrupted god, like the one that empowered that super powered mountain guy, Gron, except the one that's chasing them is way worse. And he has an army of demons. These would be known as the Burning Legion, and they just had this long-standing beef with the Draenei. So yeah, the Draenei crash land their ship called the Genocide on Draenor. And this Genocide is powered by these 3 beings of pure light. Like I said, they basically worship these beings as deities, and they're kind of powerful enough too. Like I said, they power this spaceship to go across the cosmos. But the problem is that they've been on the run for so long, going through such a shitty part of space, that they begin to lose connection with the light. And when they lose connection with the light, these creatures become conduits for the void. And like I said, the void, we don't really know too much about it at this point, but we know that it's bad. We know that it's not really good for living creatures. They kind of can't handle it. So as this creature is beginning to fall to this void, it tells the Draenei, specifically their leader, Prophet Velen, you need to like shoot me out of the ship, or I'm going to basically kill all of you. And it's already so hard because like as soon as it gets done telling them that, it immediately tries to kill the other Naru, which are what those beings are called, as well as all the Draenei. And with the help of Velen and with the other Naru, they do manage to push it out of the ship and eject it. But like I said, running on 2 barely powered batteries now and ejecting their 3rd, they smash into Draenor. And it kills a ton of the Draenei. And it kills another one of the Naru as well. So with this, the Draenei, like, they kind of recollect themselves and they look around. They're like, well, I guess this is where we're staying because we don't really have a choice anymore. Before they would go to a planet, the Legion would catch up with them, and then they would run to another planet, and it would just kind of keep going like that over and over. And now they were stuck here,
which brings the Legion to us.
And it would truly. These would have a lot of effects on the orcs themselves and their practices of shamanism as well, because as the Draenei would set out, the final living Naru, Kuru, would tell Velen, like, you need to get out of here. I'm going to be consumed by the void too. You can't stay in the mountain or stay in the Genocide. So they leave and they go and they find, wow, this plot of land looks perfect. It's got a connection to the sea. It like all this ground has been freshly tilled. Why has nobody ever settled here? This would be where they would set up their capital city of Shattrath. And this would be the ruins, and it would stand directly on top of the ruins of Goria. Velen, he had no idea about this. He was just like, well, this is the spot. I have no idea why no one has settled here. All the other people on Draenor were like, oh, well, we don't settle there because the last thing that we saw there was fucking terrifying. And it's almost like a not a ghost town, but like considered haunted, basically. So after settling, the Draenei are a really peaceful race. They're not about fighting or conflict. They just want to keep to themselves. They'll trade if others want to trade, but they are not the type to go out and be conquerors. So the ogres, seeing this and seeing them kind of be isolationists, are like, oh, weaklings. And they're reclaiming like our capital city. Like, what the fuck? How about we go beat them up and take their things, and then we can take that nice new shiny city that they just built.
Bunch of bullies.
Exactly. Specifically their leader, Hawklon. He is like Hawklon. No, Hawklon. He is the leader of the Gorians at this time, and he says, well, the only reason that they're even this powerful, and I should mention that the Draenei, like I said, they come in a spaceship, but all of their technology and all of their stuff is really advanced by comparison to the tribes of Draenor. And the ogres see this, and they're like, well, the only reason they're that powerful is because they stole that from our ancestors of Goria. So we're going to go reclaim our city, and from there, we will get that power too, and we'll have a nice new city. So all the ogres completely, like, they rally together, easily outnumber all the Draenei in Shattrath, and they march. And as they come across the battlements of Shattrath, they are easily repelled. The Draenei knock them back without an effort at all. and the ogres are like reeling and wounded, and they're trying to reorganize for like a second attack on the city. And that's when the draenei just rush in with a special elite force. They kill Hawklawn, and then they return to the safety of Shatrath, which Velen comes to the wall and says, all right, his direct quote is, "Go home and you will not be harmed." And that is all he says, and all the ogres go fleeing after what they saw.
Damn.
So that just kind of gives you, like, even by comparison to the magic of these creatures that the orcs sieged war with for, like, not hundreds of years, but definitely a few years at least, easily is not even a contest for the draenei. And originally, the orcs kind of looked at the draenei's mercy as, like, a real weakness. They were like, well, why don't you guys want to fight? The problem was now that they clearly were not weak. They clearly were very powerful in a way that the orcs did not even understand. So clans like the Bladewind would begin to raid their caravans to try and, I guess, not prod them, but to feel like they were basically keeping their land safe from what they perceived as almost an enemy. And it was specifically this Bladewind clan, and they would constantly attack. Velen's people would be getting mad with him because he would just be like, no, we're not going to go fight with the orcs. Like, even if we go and we wipe the floor with the Bladewind clan, which we would, he says it, it would be no contest. We would easily kill a small clan like that. But the problem is the orcs, they want to fight. And if we kill them, they're just going to come after us, and we don't want a war with the orcs. So they basically just let it happen. And they begin to send heavier armored guards, a group called, I believe, the Vindicators, with their caravans. And these were essentially like paladins of the Holy Light. And they were ancient, like 10,000 years old. So they're great warriors. And they would pretty easily dispatch most of these, 20-year-old orcs that would try and come and run up on them at this point. For a while, again, we would have about 200 years of peace, kind of. Not peace, but again, a balance between the orcs and draenei, where there would occasionally be some bloodshed or a skirmish or two, but oftentimes it would just be occasional trade. They would leave each other alone and live their own lives apart from each other. And then this is kind of when we come to the start of Warcraft and World of Warcraft, because this is where we're introduced to Orgrim Doomhammer and Durotan of the Frostwolf.
The bad boys.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The OGs. So Durotan was, like I mentioned earlier, the leader of the Frostwolf clan. He has like this really kind of tragic backstory where he kind of comes into power after being a fairly weaker person. But also, it doesn't go into too much detail about that. The first time we do really see them is in that Rise of the Horde novel. And by that time, he's already kind of like, I believe, 14, 15, something like that. And he is a rival with another clan's heir by the name of Orgrim Doomhammer. And they, like, originally they both snuck off to, like, listen to what the elders were talking about when they shouldn't have been. And that was boring. So they just kind of quickly became like, well, I bet I can run fast to the lake over there. And it really just, that's how their friendship blossomed. They would challenge each other. They would become friends through this way. And it was unconventional for two different tribes to have, or two different clans rather, to be friends amongst each other. But it's not like it was forbidden. And it's not like even like the elders and whatnot were like, well, they're not doing any harm, right? Like, what's the problem with it? During one of these times where Orgrim and Durotan are doing one of their races, they meet up on their border of their lands, and they're like, all right, we're going to go do a race. And they're like, cool. So they're sprinting through the forest, and they hear like this grumbling sound, and then they're attacked by an ogre. And this ogre, despite them being, again, orcs, they're significantly smaller, and this is a full-grown ogre, and they're unharmed. So they basically think that this ogre is about to pummel them to death when 3 magical arrows just immediately kill it. Its body slumps. And they look up, and they see draenei. And they're kind of shocked because, like, they don't really, like, it's not, like, common for the orcs to come rushing to the aid of the draenei either. But the draenei are just kind of, they're almost a peaceful people. They don't typically want to see wanton violence just for the sake of violence. So that's why they protect these young orcs. And seeing that it's getting really late, they're like, all right, well, it's getting late. Your guys' clans are far as shit because you guys have been running forever. So let's have you guys stay with us inside of our little city of Teledor, I believe. And then after that, we'll send you guys home in the morning. So they do. And Durotan and Ogre go to this insane city, and they are shown how to get past these defenses by the draenei. And the draenei explain everything they want to know. They tell them about all the, like, how do your cities, like, work with magic? We call upon the elements, and they explain it back and forth. And they answer everything, and they're completely open. But despite this, the orcs, they just can't trust them. They feel like something's off about they don't understand why they're so open if they're so powerful, or why they're so friendly if they're so powerful.
Why? It's kind of weird. They're giving all their information away too.
And it would bite them too, because it truly would. So it's kind of, they do get returned to their clans, and years go by, and eventually they do become the leader of the Frostwolf. And Ogre was a Blackrock, and he would come into possession of his father's legacy weapon, the doomhammer. And obviously that's why he gets his name. To jump back for a second, when they were sitting in the city with Velen, he would talk to them so gently and ask them so genuinely about every little thing that they were interested in. Like when Velen talks to Ogre, he's like, tell me about this doomhammer that you talk about so much. Like, what is it like? And Ogre just gushes about how much he admires this weapon. And Velen is so genuine in his way. He's like, I'm sure that you'll wield it with such honor and such ferocity. I have no doubt. That, again, despite the fact that they're untrusting of them, they were treated with honor and they were treated with friendliness the entire time. The problem is when this guy by the name of Gul'dan comes into the picture.
Oh, Daddy Dan.
Yeah, Daddy Dan. And if you're interested on the full, I guess not the full backstory, but some of the details of the backstory, there is the Harbinger's Gul'dan video that will give you a short detailing of how he came to be kind of the insane person that he is. But basically he was born disfigured, and among Orc society, that was absolutely just not acceptable. You had to be strong, you had to be able to fight, you had to be able to hunt. Otherwise, you were basically worthless. So he was outcasted. And the shaman was like, go seek the throne of elements. They'll be able to guide you. You just need to, go do that. And he's like, nah, fuck y'all. And he just goes and he wanders for like months and months and months. And he's just like, okay, I guess maybe the shaman's right. Maybe I should go to the throne of elements. And at this point, he's basically dying. Like, his body is giving out on him. So he goes to the throne of elements, and he pleads. And he's like, please, I'll do anything that you want. Just give me the power to not be fucked, right? So he goes, and he begs, and the elements are like, you have potential, but there's darkness. And they recoil, because they're afraid of what he could do. And seeing this, he just goes berserk, and he absolutely loses his mind. He screams that the elements have abandoned him, and that, everything is just is falling apart. And that's when he hears a voice, and the voice promises him power. The voice is like, if you follow what I tell you to do, I will give you power. He doesn't give him the full details, but essentially Gul'dan for the entire time knows that his power is going to come at the extent of the entire orc race. So he's like, yes, I'll do whatever you want. So this entity comes to him and it says, all right, here's your power. This is a brand new power that no one understands at all. And this is when they first introduce fel magic to the orcs. So this is, Gul'dan is the first warlock. He wields a magic that's not calling upon the elements or not calling upon the arcane. It comes from a demonic realm known as the Twisting Nether. And it's just this unholy force that corrupts basically everything it touches. So eventually, Gul'dan, now being empowered by this fel magic, goes back to his tribe or his clan, and he's like, hey, you remember how you guys treated me? That was really funny. None of you guys can know who I am now because I have this grander plan. So I'm torching this entire place. And he just eradicates his entire village as his first act with his power. He kills his entire clan.
Seems like a nice guy.
Truly a great guy. And then the voice comes to him and it says, all right, now you have to get in. We have to collect the orcs. We need to unify them because I need you guys for my plan. And again, it's all part of me giving you your power. And he's like, all right, bet whatever you want. So he's like, go to Shadowmoon. That's where all your guys' like wisest shamans are. And from there, I can like implant you where I need you. And I should mention that this voice that's talking to him is the Burning Legion having caught up with the Draenei again. It took them like 200 years to find Draenor, but now they're observing and they're moving pawns in this game. Specifically a grand demon by the name of Kil'jaeden, who was formerly one of the ruling members alongside Velen. So he's like this super powerful Draenei that has already been twisted and corrupted so heavily that he's like this super archdemon. He is, well, anyone who's played Warcraft knows he's a problem all the way up to like level 70. As he goes to Shadowmoon, there is this head shaman by the name of Ner'zhul. And Ner'zhul is a faithful shaman. He believes in following what the spirits say. He believes in what they do for the orcs. And he's like, okay, we're gonna go to this magical mountain that we always go to talk with our spirits. And this magical mountain is called Oshu'gun for them. And it is actually the crashed Genocide from the Draenei's arrival. They don't really know this because it's like hundreds of years removed from this event now. But now what they have realized is that when the orcs die, their spirits are being called into this place. And they don't know it, but they're actually being called into this place because of the dying Naru within the within the mountain, or we'll just call it the mountain from here on out, because that's basically what it is. It's a crystal mountain.
Oh, I remember this was in the Grand and TBC, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I remember that with those not those void guys, but you know those the guys who transmog. I forget what they're called.
Oh, the ethereals.
Ethereals. Yeah, there's a bunch of ethereal camps and stuff around it. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yes, sir. That is exactly the Genocide. So the same way that their spirits are being called to this mountain, when the Draenei die, they realize that their spirit is being called to the body of their other Naru that had previously died. And they actually took this Naru and they were like, well, shit, we can't leave you here because, you know, if somebody gets control of this void deity, it could be a problem. So they move it just north of their city to this place called Auchinleck. And it's basically like the resting place for their dead. It's a holy ground. And it's where all of the Draenei's dead go. The same way that all the orcs go to Oshu'gun. And after this time, shamans begin to go to Oshu'gun to commune with the actual ancestors of their people and to talk with them. And one of these people is Ner'zhul, who is the leader of one of the most respected clans, the Shadowmoon. And he goes there, and in a vision, he is granted wisdom from somebody that he believes to be his previous mate by the name of Rul Khan. She warns him. She says, the Draenei are plotting to kill all of the orcs, and you guys have got to, be ready to face this threat. Otherwise, they're going to kill all of the orcs. And at first, Ner'zhul's like really kind of confused because he's like, well, one, you're not even like, you weren't really like a super high ranking person in life. You weren't even a shaman. Like, it's kind of odd that you'd be the one to give me these orders. But then he's like, well, who am I to question the spirits, right? So alrighty, we got to call the clans to war. And Ner'zhul leaves. And I guess something that I should mention is at this time, Ner'zhul takes an apprentice, a man by the name of Gul'dan. Someone he doesn't realize isn't actually a shaman.
Quite the opposite.
So at the next meeting that they have with all the orcs, Ner'zhul is like, guys, the Draenei are going to turn on us and they're going to slaughter us. They've just been playing us this whole time until they were ready. I've been granted vision by the ancestors. We've got to go and we have to slaughter all of the Draenei before they kill us. And, this really shakes people like Durotan and Ogre the wrong way because they've literally been treated with nothing but respect by the Draenei. But again, you have to understand, for thousands of years, these people have lived off of this connection with the elements and the connection with their ancestors, that they have no reason to believe this to be anything other than the truth. So they begin to collect, and they begin to rise into what is now known as the Orc Horde. This is the actual beginning of the first Horde. And it is all the chieftains following under one path, a single unified goal. And it would be the horde on the front that would be led by a war chief. And the war chief would be selected basically by Gul'dan, because it would reach a point eventually where Ner'zhul would realize that he was being manipulated and that all of this wasn't actually true. But at that point, he really couldn't stop it. And he was also feeling really, really guilty because he enabled it. He was kind of the first one to bring it about. So as the Horde is forming, and as Gul'dan is kind of pulling all these strings and placing all these pawns, he sets up the Shadow Council to secretly lead the Horde. A bunch of warlocks that only listen to him. And with this, they're like, all right, we need an actual leader of the Horde, because if they don't, they're going to catch on to us. So they choose a man by the name of Blackhand. Blackhand is a Blackrock Orc, and he is a pretty brutal, ruthless, violent guy. He is all about combat. He is all about power and prestige. And I'm pretty sure when Blackhand is told they want him as war chief, he already understands that the Shadow Council is who's actually going to be leading. And he asks, like, so which one am I on? Am I with the Horde, or am I with the Shadow Council? And Gul'dan tells him, you're with both. You need to lead, and we will tell you what to do, basically. And he's like, well, as long as you guys continue to give me power, I will do that for you. And this is when Gul'dan, or I guess, so as Ner'zhul begins to understand that this isn't true, and he sees the doubts, he goes back to Oshu'gun, and he's like, he tries to commune with the spirit of his wife again, or his lost mate, and he's like, what is happening? What is happening? And the real one comes to him this time, and she says, you are like an idiot. You've sent our people down destruction, and now like the elements aren't going to help you either. And that's exactly how it goes. The orcs are going out on these these raids on draenei camps, and their shamans that are with them go to call upon the elements, and the elements do not come anymore. So all these shamans that were once these super powerful beings that could basically turn the entire tide of a battle on their own are useless, or as good as a single warrior is now. And it really kind of shocks the orcs. They begin to panic, and they begin to question like why this is happening. But Gul'dan's like, well, who cares about the elements? If they want to be like that, we can find better powers. I have somebody who wants to give us better powers. And he empowers the first warlocks with Fel in the open public of the Horde. And, you know, they show off these incredible abilities to summon these creatures that are willing to do like great atrocities, basically, and, you know, call stone and fire from the sky.
Are they drinking the blood of Ram? Is that what's happening right now? Or are they just...
Not yet. See, this is just the beginning of their Fel corruption. This was kind of... They would begin to slightly... This is actually where they would slightly begin to turn green as orcs. It would
without
be first
drinking,
noticing, like, yeah, without drinking. It would just kind of be noticed that the children were turning greener every generation and whatnot. Durotan specifically mentions this to his wife, Draka. And they would just turn greener. And even the orcs that were born brown, like Durotan and Draka, would begin to notice their own flesh turning greener and drier and dead. But the Horde has basically fully drank the Kool-Aid. They're all in on that the draenei are causing our problems, and if we kill them, then everything will be fine. So the Horde marches on all of the draenei cities. They absolutely crush them because the draenei, they don't really want to fight back, but also they told Durotan and Ogre the secret to all of their defenses. So Orgrim and Durotan, despite the fact that they don't really entirely support what's going on, they're loyal to their clans and to the Horde, so they tell them about how to get through the defenses of places like Karabor and Teledor and all these. And the Horde slaughter, they genocide the Draenei. The Draenei barely fight back, and the ones that do, like, it's almost like this tragic event, because there is the scene where Durotan is raiding one of the cities, and he's knocked down by a Vindicator, and he's about to be killed, and he looks up and he sees the face of the man who saved him from the Ogre. And then the guy is, like, shocked at first, and, like, they're just kind of staring at each other before another orc just murders him. But he basically, like, makes a joke about it, but Durotan's just sitting there, like, horrified. He felt like this is wrong. And it kind of was, because the whole point of this was literally just they were being used to kill the Draenei for the Legion's purpose, and so that they could essentially drain the entire planet and use the orcs again as another weapon. I guess we'll just move on to Shattrath, when it really kind of all comes together. They full-scale siege on Shattrath after they completely crush Karabor, and these fel-driven beings are just, like, rampantly killing everything in sight. And all as Durotan and Ogrim look around at their fellow orcs, just, like, basically desecrating corpses and looking for anything to fight, even as their own, like, allies are laying on the ground injured and stuff, they're beginning to realize, like, we're being corrupted and we're being sent down the wrong path. Which is why after they do destroy Shattrath, even though they did destroy Shattrath, Velen and a small group of his followers would leave to a place called the Zenger Marsh, somewhere where the orcs didn't really venture to and didn't really know about. And that's where they would hide. And basically the Draenei would accept the result that their fate was to pretend that they had died off. And the orcs would just hunt every Draenei that they could to extinction. But then there wouldn't be any more Draenei. And they would still be I guess I should mention, then they would be given the blood of Manaroth. So Manaroth, at this point, the Burning Legion doesn't even hide its attempts to pretend what they are. Manaroth, this giant demon, crash lands on Draenor. And he just hops up and he says, "Hey guys, you're going to drink my blood now because it's going to make you super strong and you'll be able to find and kill all the Draenei." And the orcs are like, "We love killing the Draenei." Sure. So the first one to take this gift is a man by the name of Grommash Hellscream. And he'll become a major player later down the line. But for right now, he is already one of the Horde's, like, most ferocious and violent kind of warriors. And this blood just sends it into overdrive. And this is why the siege on Shattrath turns into such a bloodshed. But it also begins to kind of eat at the orcs. Because after they don't have the Draenei to chase down anymore, they're just looking to fight anybody. So next they go after the Arakoa. And despite the fact that they can't fly and sky reaches all the way up in the sky, they find a way and they scale the mountains, and they, through the ferocity and through the burning in their blood, find more people to fight. But even they go away eventually. And their people are turned into these twisted, corrupted shadow variants of the Arakoa after they're dragged into these pools by the orcs. And you can just see as the timeline goes on, as the fell corruption takes over, that the orcs become more and more sadistic. They're less about honor and more about brutalism and more about violence. So eventually they basically kill everybody.
Though, right? Because of the blood.
Because of the blood, but also just because, like I said, it was the perfect storm. The Burning Legion couldn't have picked better candidates, because They wanted to fight people, and they knew, or I guess they had all the strings that they could pull to give them a good fight. But eventually the planet would just start to die off. The infection that would affect all the orcs, this fell corruption, it would begin to go into the planet itself, and you would see all of like these wildlife that they once thrived off of, and these lands that they once lived in harmony with begin to just die and literally collapse and perish into nothing. And eventually this entire place would become a part of the universe known as the Twisting Nether, which is basically fully in fell corruption. There's really no other way to put it. But all of the orcs, they were just fighting amongst each other now. They didn't really have anything else to do. And the voice that was telling Gul'dan everything, all of his guidance, it just disappeared after the Draenei died. It didn't give him any more guidance. It just stopped. And at first he's like really confused, and he's like, well, we're fucked. I don't know what I've done. Well, at the very least, I think he has his power, so I don't know if he really cares. But he is granted a vision. And he's not granted a vision by the same person, but he is granted by a vision by somebody who is corrupted by the same legion. He's actually granted a vision by a man known as Medivh, the guardian of Tirisfal. And he would be the reason that the orcs would come to Draenor. Medivh is someone we're going to get into next episode, because him and his mom Awen are, well, some of the biggest players in all of Warcraft, and honestly, some of the craziestly strong power characters in all of Warcraft.
I think you meant to say come to Azeroth, not Draenor. They were in Draenor.
Oh, yes, I did. So yeah, this would be what leads the orcs to go to Azeroth. They would be brought here through this vision. Gul'dan would be given a vision of a lush land that has all of these wonderful things it can go do. And he's like, all right, how do I get there? And Medivh's like, got to build a portal. I already got one hooked up on my end over here. So if you build it, I will get you through here. And Gul'dan is like, okay. So they go and they build this massive portal. And I mean, it's massive. It's probably like as tall as the Gron, like 60 feet or something like that. It's a massive, massive, massive gateway of black stone. And it's powered through living souls. Like when Durotan and Ogre go to the dark portal, they find that the draenei that have survived are being held prisoner there, and their souls are being used to power this gateway.
You see it in the Warcraft movie, and it's pretty brutal. That movie, there was people didn't like. I loved it as a Warcraft fan, just because it showed a lot of lore and some good light. And yeah, dude, it's pretty brutal.
I guess I should mention that technically the cinematic universe isn't lined up with the actual in-game World of Warcraft, because in the games, Durotan is alive until I believe Warcraft 2. And he goes through the Dark Portal and is on Azeroth for a good while in Warsong Valley. But after that, let's just go back to the Dark Portal. So, they start sacrificing all these people to the Dark Portal. And eventually, just as their planet is dying, and there's no hope for it left, even Durotan and Ogre look at each other and they just say, like, well, we don't really have a choice but to go to this place because we're going to die here. There's nothing left on Draenor. Draenor has become a husk. So their first scouts go through this portal. And sure enough, they come back with reptilian-like creatures with stubby little legs and long, snappy jaws that are probably crocodiles. And they come back with these jaguars and stuff like that. And from there, they are like, all right, well, we're going through the Dark Portal. And even, once again, though they don't necessarily believe in it, they rush through to face a new enemy at the will of somebody they don't even know. But that is information that we will pick up on next episode.
Wow. Orcs are pretty badass, man.
They do have a pretty crazy storyline. And I guess I should mention that if you are interested in learning any more about like these things that we've discussed in this episode, the references that I have that I used mostly, like I said, specifically are going to be the Chronicle, specifically Volume 2. Chapters 1 through 3 are mainly focused around this entire time frame. The Rise of the Horde novel by Christy Golden. It is absolutely some of the best Warcraft lore that you can get. And then the Harbinger's Gul'dan video, like I mentioned, as well as the Lords of War Durotan video that I mentioned.
You know what I like about the Orcs? A couple things. One, WoW wouldn't really exist without Orcs, right? There's so much that the Orcs has caused. And two, the diversity of the clans. There's no other race that I feel like has so many different clans, good at different things, with different cultures, and it's remarkable. And their power too. Their power.
I do like it. I guess I should preface, I am an Alliance player, so I do have a bit of a disdain towards the Orcs, but also it's when you do get into the nitty gritty of their story and you really like immerse yourself in the world of Draenor, it is understandable how they got to where they were, especially when you understand that from basically the inception of the Orcs, they were forced to fight for every single thing, for life, for every moment. So when it comes to fighting and to conquest and to war, it's just, it feels bad to say, but it's basically their nature. It's not that they are inherently evil. It's just that they are inherently combative.
Are you victim blaming? No.
They, like, I mean, yeah, they were literally victims too. They were slaves to the Ogres and the Ogron, and we weren't even able to get into a bunch of the other stuff that featured, like, the Ogres and some of their, like, half-breeds that they made, like Garona half-orcan and stuff like that. But also, there are some other... There's just a lot to get into when it comes to this ancient Draenor stuff. So we tried to keep it mainly focused on the Orcs. There are some other stuff like how the Shattered Hand came to be and stuff like that we didn't really get into. But I imagine if we were to ever do like a more deep dive on the Ogres, because they do play a later story into like Dire Maul and stuff like that as well. We could probably talk about the Shattered Hand and Kargath Blade Fist and stuff like that and whatnot.
Oh, yeah. It gets confusing with the two different timelines with Kargath and shit, too.
Well, and I'm going to try and avoid... I should just mention to anyone who doesn't play WoW, if you don't play WoW, there's a lot of timey-wimey shit. There are multiple timelines and stuff like that because one of the aspects of the universe is time. There's like these 5 aspects, and one of them is time. So we get a lot of timey-wimey stuff, but while you can gain a lot of input from the Warlords of Draenor expansion that is this alternate timeline, I tried to avoid talking about it too much because I know that it does lead to confusion. I feel like even when the Warlords expansion released, people just didn't understand enough about the actual origins of the Horde and didn't have enough information about it to really gain an appropriate understanding of like what was canon and what was not. Because even when it comes to like Gul'dan's origin, it's super, like, there's a bunch of people who are really conflicted. Like, was he a shaman? Was he a warlock? Was it this cinematic? Was that? According to the chronicles, he did go back and slaughter his entire village and all that stuff and was spoken to by Sargeras in the Throne of Elements. So that is where I'm taking my canon from, as that is the most recent entry from 2017.
Gotcha.
So for next episode, if you guys are looking to join us for next time, we are going to be covering the First War and the Alliance of Azeroth. Or I guess more like the humans of Azeroth, because there are a lot of races already there, and the Orcs are just kind of one piece that arrive. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this episode. Your guys' support truly means the world to us. If you're interested in hearing more, we have our full show on YouTube and Spotify, new episodes dropping every Tuesday. I also want to take this moment to give a special thank you to Fantasy Lo-Fi for providing the music for this episode. You can find them on YouTube at Fantasy Lo-Fi or on Spotify under Bits and Hits. Be sure to show them some love, as their music does truly bring this journey to life. Once again, thank you for joining us on Tides of Lore, and we will see you next week.